So we are pleased to have here our March edition of Fireside Chat. I guess last I checked, Tom, is there still ice on Lake Minnetonka that we know of? Is that true?
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I don't get out to Minnetonka that often. There's ice on the pond outside my house, so
That counts. That counts. So it's sort of all part of the same watershed, right? So
yes.
so thus it is a fireside chat, still not quite lakeside when the ice is gone. But in any case, we are pleased to welcome with us today as our great guest speaker, Joe Grogan. Joe has a distinguished career uh, in the federal government and also in the private sector, lots of different areas in the med tech space, particularly pharmaceuticals. He also served as the domestic policy advisor or director for the previous administration. Actually, he and I worked together for a lot of those issues. But today, our topic is going to focus on um, basically what, as Joe looks in the future, given all his expertise and his connections, where he sees and the conversation we can have together, disruptive future medical technology. And so I'm gonna preface it a little bit just to level set. I think we have seen some really amazing technologies that have come out on the pharmaceutical side. I know, Joe, when you and I were working together, we talked a lot about the potential for biosimilars, particularly after the first Hep C drug comes out and then others that come along afterwards and actually have cure rather than not just treatment. And I guess the concern is that some of the things we're looking at both on the pharma side and maybe even in medical device are going to be incredible and potentially cures, but the costs are just extraordinary. And like you to comment on that as we get into this. But first of all, if you wouldn't mind, just I guess one of our first questions is what keeps you up at night when you think about this industry? And without getting into politics at all, but just in terms of the industry and its current trajectory, what bothers you? And then we can get into the more meaty conversations about disruption.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be able to speak with such a group. And Steve, it's great. Always great to see you. And thanks for asking me to join you. I love every conversation I have with you, and I always learn something. So I'm looking forward to this one as well. When I've been in healthcare in the DC space for over 20 years now, meaning this intersection between innovation and regulation. And even though I haven't lived in DC for the past year, pretty much my entire professional career has been associated with healthcare regulation and healthcare policy. And the big thing that keeps me awake at night, the reason why I've stayed in it is because our ability to conquer these challenges intellectually, to solve them, to develop things like CRISPR technology or develop a cure for hepatitis C or amazing tests. Now we'll talk more about artificial intelligence, I'm sure, but healthcare and education are the two areas we don't see cost compression with innovation, and that's because they're so heavily regulated. Full stop. That's it. In any other area, when you have innovation, you will have cost compression. And you don't see it because the federal government has tremendous barriers to entry, the state governments as well. And we live in a very, very regulated healthcare environment that puts up huge barriers to innovators to enter the market. And then the reimbursement side of the house is heavily regulated in a top-down price setting architecture that doesn't allow for disruptive technologies to be embraced and shrink those costs. Now, sometimes you can get more value, but we have a tremendous debt problem. And what worries me over time is you'll see more of what we saw with the Inflation Reduction Act, which is this clamoring for, we don't have enough money, so let's have the government set prices even more stringently, which is what they're doing with beginning to do with drugs now in the Inflation Reduction Act. And you'll see more of it. You'll see, which is effectively rationing, because price setting leads to shortages always and everywhere. So that's what keeps me up at night, Steve.
So that's a tall list. So talk about the part that excites you a little bit, and this could be either regular innovation or disruptive innovation. I mean, you are in an interesting spot, having left the White House. Even before that, you always kept an eye out, it seems, for the new tech. What excites you about, that could be that magic bullet, one or two, that like it will save money. It's going to cost us money, but in the long run, it'll save us money too.
Right. Well, I think some of there's no question some of these amazing drugs that we're starting to see to treat diseases like sickle cell, Duchenne's disease, cystic fibrosis, the budding CRISPR technology, which we're just starting to see. I mean, objectively, they're miracles. What we're able to do now, we're not getting the results yet that we will get someday, but we are on the cusp of something really tremendous with our ability to cure and mitigate really grievous diseases that would have been a death sentence or a life of lack of capacity. So that's like one of the most exciting things in my lifetime, is that I think we'll see, if I live a little bit longer, I think we'll start to see even more cures, including for cancer, being developed with these technologies. Right now, the thing that I'm most excited about is the thing that a lot of people are excited about, which is artificial intelligence, because I think that it's the technology right now that's available that could force us to get cost compression, that could allow us to really shrink and get efficiencies of the size of the administrative burden, but also allow more access for people, for Americans to get health care, and intervene sooner and avoid a lot of treatments that are unnecessary and a lot of bad outcomes. So artificial intelligence is what has got me really excited right now from a policy and technological aspect. And I think it's going to be ripe for the foreseeable future.
So I know you do a lot of work with a lot of different innovators, and I don't want to, you obviously, and you wouldn't anyway, reveal anything about it, but can you give me like one or two concrete examples where AI can be a big game changer that really we didn't have on the forefront before? Whether it be for, yeah, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, there's a couple. One company that I'll name it because it's out there, is a company called Nested Knowledge that has the ability to gather up clinical data from a host of different services and allow you to compile a file for interactions with a regulator much more quickly than it ever would have done before. So what might have taken, gathering the requisite data for a clinical trial, for instance, from multiple clinical trials, real world evidence, economic evidence to be brought to bear with a regulator who cares about that. It might take 18 months, 2 years to compile all this data to be submitted. You can do it in weeks, perhaps. You can go, and you don't have to run an additional clinical trial, because you can find somebody somewhere else who has it, who's already done it or done a part of it, and combine it. So that's exciting. There's a couple that are using artificial intelligence to identify molecules to test them and repurpose them for new treatments much more quickly without as much trial and error in testing these molecules. So that's really exciting. And then there's companies like Digital Diagnostics, which was the first one, artificial intelligence diagnostic a couple of years ago, which has a artificial intelligence diagnostic. It reads your retina and can figure out whether or not you're at high risk or probable to be on track for diabetic retinopathy, which has disproportionately affects people at lower socioeconomic levels because they're not able to see specialists as often. And if you were able to deploy that technology, you could have more general practitioners using it. You could have more people in rural areas or under-resourced urban areas and get more diagnoses, earlier treatment. That type of stuff is really exciting. And I think you could start to see more of that with nurse practitioners and things like that, utilizing these technologies. but you're starting to see it in electronic health records where
Mhm.
you're deploying markers, you're deploying artificial intelligence in various health platforms and saying, okay, this person has 5 indicators that we didn't understand before, but now wait a second, we're seeing a pattern where they're at higher risk of of X or Y condition.
So if you guys are all in Washington, and Joe, you're speaking for Washington in broad strokes here, AI is on everybody's list. Is I'm a big proponent. I think it's going to be a powerful tool and it's going to touch a lot of things, but it's new and it keeps changing every day, right? And it's
Yeah.
hard to keep up with. I was going to say, if anybody wants to know more about what Joe was talking about on CRISPR technology, then read The Code Breaker by Walter Isaacson and Jennifer Doudna, and you get a good science lesson, simple but good, on what's going on in CRISPR. That book doesn't exist yet for AI in healthcare because by the time a book came out, it would be obsolete. With that as a start, and me being positive, I'm still curious, being in Washington, there has to be some, I would think, regulation of this, but before there's regulation, there has to be understanding. Do you get the sense that the people around you are aware of how big this is going to be and how it could get off the rails if it doesn't have at least some regulation?
Well, there's definitely concern. Well, let me just say this. I don't really feel like there's a good handle on the part of policymakers about what AI is and its promise. I do think there is a tremendous amount of fear that it's going to get out of control and it needs to be regulated sooner rather than later. The problem is if you don't understand what it is, how do you regulate it? And I think there's a fascinating, just in the last couple days, we saw um, Google had this disaster rollout of their Gemini artificial intelligence with these absurd results coming out, right? And then in the last couple days, we've seen them being announced as a partner with Mayo Clinic to be something called an assurance lab, where they're basically going to be a private sector validator for AI innovations in healthcare. And this is going to be a consortium between the head of digital diagnostics at FDA is going to be on the board. Um, MITRE Corporation is going to put their head of digital, Brian Anderson, on the board. You're going to have somebody from Stanford, somebody from Mayo, who leads the interactions with Google. My question is, if Google can't show somebody a picture of a white male, how are they going to tell us whether or not an artificial intelligence app that somebody else developed, it works or not? Now, Google has failed in every single healthcare venture that they've engaged in. Generally, their pattern is they come in with much fanfare, they're going to change it, they get their ass kicked. They say they make a big announcement, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years later, we're leaving healthcare. Then they come back in. Mayo continually tries to market things, enter the commercial space with all their expertise. They fail. So now you've got these incredible marquee names coming in and saying they're going to partner and do this with the government. And I don't see any reason why we would think they would have a core competency in validating these things. Moreover, I think it's the wrong approach. I mean, I don't see how, if somebody develops a artificial intelligence application program for that, and they develop it, say, in Albany, New York at the VA system, I don't see how you ship it off to Minnesota in the abstract and have it tested with Google. It seems to me it needs to be tested with physicians and nurses and families, and they're looking at this and they say, okay, the artificial intelligence um, application says that we need to be on the lookout for gangrene, or we need to be on the lookout for suicidality, or any number of things, and you need to deploy it over time, second guess it, and see if it works, not ship it off into the abstract. Now, that is not that what presupposes this of course, is that doctors and professionals are still involved as it's being unveiled and as you're rolling this out and testing it in the community where it was developed, in the clinical setting where it's developed, with the experts that are local. I think that's where we are. You know, I don't think we're in a position where the Federal Aeronautics Administration should swoop down to Kitty Hawk and tell the Wright brothers how they should develop an airplane. The Wright brothers are developing the airplane. They're the innovators. And the FAA can't develop a regulatory construct for what they're doing on the sand dunes. And I think we're way ahead of ourselves by figuring out how this stuff is going to be regulated when we are still trying to figure out how it's going to work.
There's just a follow-on question there, Joe. This is probably more germane from you than most of the people. I mean, you work with the FDA, both in the role you had previous administration and previous jobs too. I mean, how might you think FDA would approach? Because if it's doing diagnostics, and let's say it's doing diagnostics and it's cancer,
Right.
then I mean, it's a whole different ballgame, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
what are your
Well,
thoughts?
this is the challenge for FDA. I mean, FDA has been wrestling with this since I was there. When I was there during the Bush administration, they wanted to regulate what they called in vitro diagnostic multivariate index assays. And what those were diagnostics with an algorithm. It was basically artificial intelligence back in the day. And their concern was, what is in the algorithm? We want to see what's in the algorithm. But they didn't have the ability to really unpack what was in the algorithm anyway. And that guidance document at the time never got out. It was delayed. The Obama administration had a foray back in. Now, this is an interesting case study in regulation with the FDA, because you get the new mathematical innovations around algorithms and machine learning and the traditional diagnostics. But they were combining, FDA has always been concerned about these laboratory developed tests. Traditionally, FDA did not exercise enforcement in this area because the test didn't cross state lines. Remember, interstate commerce and the federal government has authority. Well, private labs, state labs, academic medical centers, and hospitals would often develop their own laboratory developed tests for any number of things. And the technology is now, science is advancing more. You can do a lot of these around cancer. Okay. Just as a little bit of a backstory, during the Obama administration, this is after the Bush administration's FDA failed to regulate in vitro diagnostic multivariate index assays. There was no regulation in this area, and we had a Zika outbreak. For those of you who are too young to remember this, it was a tropical disease that led to, in many cases, fetal abnormalities among pregnant women. There was a lot of concern at FDA with the development of these laboratory developed tests that some women would or would not elect to terminate a pregnancy based upon a result of positivity or negativity around Zika. So they put a rule out that said if there's a public health emergency, FDA is not going to allow anybody to develop and sell a laboratory developed test without prior approval. That policy carried forward into the Trump administration and wasn't really enforced, wasn't really discussed much. And then bammo, COVID hits, and it was one of the things that shut down testing development. Now you're seeing this in the early days of the COVID epidemic, and ultimately that guidance was repealed as we unpacked that. Now, so you're seeing this algorithm issue on one side and the traditional diagnostic. And just today, I think it was announced that the Office of Management and Budget is reviewing for final publication FDA's assertion of authority around laboratory developed tests more broadly. And who's most pissed off about this? The cancer hospitals, places like St. Jude, which are using laboratory developed tests to titrate cancer care and think this is really going to stick it to them. A lot of the diagnostic companies, the bigger companies, are conflicted because they're like, what the hell? We have to go through FDA. We sell stuff across state lines. We want to develop these tests and capture the market. but we don't like FDA regulation, but we're able to game the system for ourselves. So I think it's ironic that the hospitals are, it's maybe not ironic, it's really somewhat problematic that the hospitals are going to have to deal with this FDA regulation of what is really, to me, a practice of medicine issue and shouldn't be subject to FDA regulatory authority.
Tom, we have actually a lot of students in the room and online, and I thought as a novelty, we might let them ask some questions too. So unless you have one more to fire in the hole.
Go
All
for it.
right. All right. So folks around the table, make sure you speak up if you have any questions. As you can tell, I will call him now Professor Grogan, given how much knowledge you're dropping on us, Joe. I mean, geez, has a lot to share. Any questions? Yes, make sure you speak up.
Hi, my name is Kevin. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I have a question for Joseph. So one thing that I've heard is that I think because for AI and diagnostics or in the whole healthcare industry, there's a lot of conflict in interest. So for traditional diagnostic companies or even for pharmaceutical companies, AI can really, change the way how they play. And then in this cases, do you think that this conflict of interest would stop or slow down the speed of AI in healthcare or the whole development of AI in healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, I think this happens a lot. And I don't know specific, here's how I view the conflict of interest issue with technological innovation. The conflict of interest that I see that I'm focused on is the conflict between the promise of a technology to be disruptive and threaten the business model and reimbursement rates of an entrenched interest. So if, say, a hospital is able to reimburse, I'll pick a number, $8,000 for X, and a new technology comes in and can do the same thing for 6, frequently the hospital and the doctors are going to try and figure out how to go to CMS and say, you know what, we got a bargain for you. We can do it for 14. Give us the 6, give us the 8, and we're going to add it on top. And frequently these technologies, they don't bring the cost down, they become cost additive because you're in the reimbursement scheme. And if the technology is a threat, another example would be, and I don't think enough attention is paid to like reimbursement and setting innovation and disruption, but ambulatory surgical clinics, for instance, you can have a specialist for knee surgery. The best knee surgeons in Denver, say, get together, and they've got tons of them, right? Because people are blowing their knees out all the time for skiing. So they decide, you know what, we're going to leave the hospital and we're going to set up specialty surgical clinics. We can bring the cost down. We don't have as much of a facility burden as the huge hospital. We can do knee reconstructions and knee surgery for half the price. Well, who's that a threat to? It's a threat to the hospitals. And they will go to the federal government repeatedly to try and crush those ambulatory surgical centers and say, no way, those guys cannot get reimbursed at a lower level. We have all this actual additional infrastructure. We do not want cost containment, cost compression, and we don't want the patients to be able to make this choice. And that was something that I was subjected to because we had proposed this, what's called site neutrality, which is to reimburse everybody at the same rate. And the hospitals want additional reimbursement for all the extra infrastructure. And it hurts the consumer patient, the payer, whether it's the insurance company or the taxpayer. So the conflict frequently with technology is around the reimbursement rate, and the entrenched interests don't want to see a new technology get adopted that's going to threaten their reimbursement levels.
Thank you. I also have a follow-up question. So first,
Hold on.
oh, sorry.
There are other people. Anyone else have another question? Yeah, you gotta be loud.
So, in terms of regulations for biosimilars, how do we make sure to have same standard identical batches of biological products?
Yeah, that's it's really interesting. I mean, if you go back and you think about the policy debate around that, when the Hatch-Waxman construct was developed, which created the generic drug industry back in the day for small molecules, biologics were not included in that. That was a really new technology back then that was just starting. Nobody thought that that technology that you could copy at all. Well, as science advanced, and I think this is a key thing to think about or ask yourselves, is a biosimilar truly innovative? I would suggest it is, because it is a huge scientific achievement to accomplish the copying of a protein-based treatment. And to your point, to develop the batches to be, I don't know if the word identical is fair. It's gonna be something like simpatico or harmonious or close enough is more apt to it. But this is a big question that FDA was grappling with for a number of years. There was an incident with biologic manufacturers, including a terrible incident in Europe with incidents of red cell aplasia, which prevents your body's ability to make red blood cells to carry oxygen through your system. And it was because of a contaminated batch of biological treatments. But the technology has advanced to be able to accomplish this and accomplish interchangeability between different biologics and biosimilars and the innovator. It is not a simple task, but FDA has developed a lot of time and effort into this, and they have, as have the companies like Amgen and Johnson and Johnson and the innovators in this space who now are all making biosimilars as well. So it's possible scientifically and from a policy perspective, FDA has gotten to a point where they feel comfortable with it, and it's been deployed enough that I don't have any concerns about it. Absent, anything can go wrong anytime in any manufacturing process.
We're gonna
Question, sorry.
one more, and then I'm gonna let Tom round out the on the record part, and then we're gonna go off the record. Yeah, go ahead.
Joe, you bring up a great point on whether or not reimbursement should alter for high cost innovation. And there's a few examples, but one that sticks out to me is robotics, surgical robotics versus traditional laparoscopy. We go round and round on the data. No difference in reimbursement, but people buying these multi-million-dollar products hand over fist to appease the physician. Play that out for us. Where do you see that going? Obviously, we need more competitors in the market, but with no difference in reimbursement for robotic versus traditional laparoscopy, let's say, play that out for us. I think this is a great topic, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, if you look at any other technology that was developed, whether it's air conditioning or refrigeration or central heat, when it's first developed, it's only the wealthy that can access it, right? Automobiles, air travel, anything. I mean, things always come in at a very high price point, but over time, that high price brings more competitors, brings more innovation into the marketplace. I haven't paid as much attention in the past couple of years to the surgical robotics. I used to be more on top of it and its promise. I think it still does have a lot of promise to get better outcomes, as well as allow, with even further technology and ability to do these things remotely, an ability to get more specialists, and more experts in the procedures to the patients who need them. But unfortunately, like I said, I mean, unfortunately, we don't have the market forces at play enough in healthcare to bring the cost of the robotics down. I mean, I think in any other market, if it wasn't so heavily regulated, the cost of some of these machines would have been coming down over the past few years. I haven't seen too many studies on that, but it just seems to me that the prices are still awfully high and they haven't really, you don't get the cost compression that you do with technologies the way you do with like the quality of your automobile, you know, or the quality of any other things that you buy over the last 80 years.
Tom, can you round us home for on the record?
Before we go off the record, I'll go where Joe started, and that is with new technologies and the transformation. I've thought for a while now, and AI just added, jet fuel to the whole fire, but we seem to be at a technological um, uh, point where things are going to take off at a much more accelerated rate. And Joe mentioned CRISPR, which is basically DNA rewriting, Hep C curing a disease, and then charging for what the long-term costs of treating that disease would be, and by obviating it, coming up with some cost controls there. I would add to that the GLP-1 agonists that are going on now, and they're expensive, but maybe the powers that be will see that such a huge market, they'll invest more money, they'll come up with different ones, they'll have different side effects, etc. And you're a little behind when you watch 60 Minutes last night and they're talking to the Nobel Prize winners that developed mRNA, but it's breaking news. That I would also put in there as another one of those technologies. And then you just put on top of that AI. I think we're at a wonderful time for this inflection point of technology. But we can't do it in a vacuum, and we do need to have some sense of not a bunch of cowboys out there doing whatever, whenever, and cleaning up afterwards. There needs to be some grown-up attention to all of this, and I'm baffled trying to figure out who's going to do that and when. But we can talk about that in the off the record. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. All right, this concludes our on the record process. These things get recorded and for posterity, and look for them soon.